Hello, welcome to Hidden History Interviews. I'm your host, John Rodriguez, and in this series, I sit down with authors, podcasters, and content creators and have real conversations about history. But when the topics cover people who have been hidden in history, well, now you really have my attention. On today's episode, I had the chance to sit down and speak with author and historian Lorissa Rinehart, whose forthcoming biography, First to the Front, The Untold Story of Dickie Chapelle, Trailblazing Female War Correspondent, will be hitting bookshelves across America on July 11, 2023. Dickie Chappelle was a pioneering photojournalist who, from World War II through the early days of Vietnam, got her story by any means necessary as one of the first female war correspondents. For many years after her death, Dickie's accomplishments were lost to history until Lorissa decided to take on the task of telling the world her story. Now, before we speak with Lorissa all about her book, First to the Front, it would be remiss of me not to mention that for those who don't know, I am also the host of Hidden History and Odyssey Through Time, a history podcast that highlights honorable stories that have been buried deep in the sands of time. All episodes are available on our website, hiddenhistorypod.com, and on all major podcast platforms. You can also follow us on Instagram at Hidden History Pod. Now let's get to the show. For those watching, Larissa here has written a book about a woman named Dickey Chapelle. Her book is called First to the Front, The Untold Story of Dickie Chappelle, Trailblazing Female War Correspondent. All right. Now, just to give the viewers just a little teaser about this woman, Dickie Chappelle, before we get into our conversation, I would just like to point out a couple of little facts about Dickie. Dickey was the first Western journalist to gain accreditation with the Algerian Liberation Front and spent a month covering their campaign against French colonial rule. She was the first Western female reporter to march with the Cuban Revolutionary Army. She was the first woman to be given permission to paratroop with the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions. Later, she became the first female reporter to be stationed with covert special forces in Laos. This is an amazing woman. And obviously, we're going to learn a lot more about her from Larissa here. But I want to start us off with a general question that we'll circle back to at the end of this conversation. But after just hearing those few little things about this woman, Dickie Chappelle, why isn't she a bigger part of women's history? Now, we probably can't answer that right now. After our conversation, though, we're going to circle back to it and try to figure out, or at least figure out some little answer of why amazing women like this are ignored again and again, and we'll get to it. But Larissa, thank you. How are you today?
I'm so great. I'm so happy to be here talking about Dickie Chapelle and First to the Front. The publication day is coming up, so I'm just
Hmm.
really happy to be sharing her story with the world because, as you said, she's just not very well known, and especially given like just the list of accomplishments that you just sort of enumerated, which are actually a small sliver of everything she
Yep.
did in her life and her career. So,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's this is great. We're gonna have a conversation here, and we're gonna talk about Dickie, and Larissa's gonna tell us a lot more. And let's just jump into it. Larissa, if you could just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, your background, and then you could tell us about your book. Who was Dickie Chappelle?
So, in terms of my background, I kind of come to writing circuitously. I mean, I knew I always wanted to be a writer, ever since I was honestly like 12 years old or something. But as life does, I kind of got blown off course. I was
Yeah.
very involved with social justice and human rights issues. I did this sort of in high school, but then also it was part of my career. I was a waitress for a long time, as a lot of us folks are, trying to make it in the
Yeah.
creative or social justice fields. Um,
Hmm.
and then, I sort of happened into contemporary art curating, which I did for 10 years in New York. And then, in 2016, the sort of political tumult of that year made me realize that if you have a dream in life, you have to pursue it.
Yeah.
because we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the world, to
Hmm.
be our best selves. And I know that
Yep.
sounds kind of grandiose, but that was my feeling.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, and so I sort of did a 180, went back to my original dream. I went to NYU to get my master's degree in an effort to get back to writing, right? To get my bona fides up for writing. And I wrote my thesis on the audio letters that American GIs would record and send home to their
Hmm.
family, and likewise the
Yeah.
audio letters that they would send back. And I came across the name Dickey Chapelle, and I had actually heard about her in high school.
Oh.
And so it was, again, this return to writing and this return to one of my early folk heroes, which was Dickey Chapelle. And that is how I got to writing about her. This book began as an article and narratively, and then from there I developed it into a book and a book pitch. And then, the
Wow.
published book that's coming out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That that's very interesting. It's like you said, most of us we start off doing one thing and then and another thing and then next thing you know, now you have a book coming out about this
Yeah.
woman. Uh, like, but maybe 10 years ago you would have never thought you'd be writing a book,
No,
and it's just
absolutely not.
it's amazing. So was there any I know Dickie was a interesting person to you, but what inspired you to really decide to, I'm gonna sit down and do the research, commit the time, and write a whole, book about this woman?
Yeah, so in short, she inspired me, right? So as I mentioned,
Hmm.
I sort of re discovered her in doing my master's degree. And I just started, Googling around to see what I could find. And I could find very little on the sort of broader web. And then I dove deeper. Right at the time, I had access to all the academic articles that ever were and ever have been. And still, her writing was not preserved in these academic databases.
Hmm.
Um, so then I did a deeper search and I found her writing at last in a public library on microfilm, which is, for those of you who are under, I don't know, 40.
For probably most of the viewers don't
Yes.
know, unless they're, into history or research in
Yeah.
general. But yeah, go on, please.
Oh, shoot. Sorry, John. I have to turn off my air conditioning.
Not a
Otherwise,
problem.
it'll be too loud. Um, Pardon the interruption. So, yeah, microfilm is basically when you miniaturize text and you put it on clear film, but then it requires this giant machine that you like
Hmm.
put up to your face and you're sitting at it like a desk. It's on a desk and you scroll through it to what you're looking for. And so I was in the basement of the public library. And by the way, a lot of these microfilms are being de-acquisitioned now. So they're being just thrown out because libraries don't have space for them and not a lot of people are
Hmm.
using them. So I won't go into the
Yeah.
politics of libraries, but to me, this is a travesty. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
agree.
so I was lucky enough to find her work there. And, she was, as you mentioned, in Algeria. She was on Okinawa. She was patrolling the border of the USSR with Turkish troops on, New Year's Eve, 1957. Like, she was everywhere in the Cold War, right? She was reporting on almost every major conflict, and she was reporting on things that others didn't. You mentioned special
Hmm.
forces in Laos. She was also with anti-communist guerrilla army in the Mekong Delta, and she was the only Western reporter to be embedded with them for a long period of time. I think she was there for 4 to 6 weeks, and then again, she was also one of the only Western reporters, and at times the only Western reporter to be, deep into Turkey, because that was a central sort of border of the Cold War, of the free world and the communist war. communist world. And she really, in addition to being where a lot of other places, people were not, where a lot of other correspondents were not willing to go, she also had this incredibly human perspective, right? She was interested in the soldiers fighting the war and the civilians caught in the crossfire. Those were the people she wanted to
Yeah.
talk about, and those were the stories she wanted to cover. And that too was rare at the time. And I wanted to
Yeah.
bring her voice and the history that she captured to the forefront of our current conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very important. Not only everything you mentioned about Dickey and her accomplishments, but it's the fact that people need to, it's important, I think, very important to remember that she was a woman doing this.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Mm-hmm.
something that I believe now more than ever should be stressed. Excuse me. Because just because it was the time periods that women weren't allowed to do such things. You
Mm-hmm.
know, women were expected to get married, be in the house, blah blah blah. But this was a woman who from the beginning, her parent, went against what her parents, ultimately wanted for her, and
Mm-hmm.
went her own way. And look what she did. She did things that women just, you said you mentioned that some correspondent these were areas that some correspondents wouldn't dare to go to. Heck, this was a woman going to these. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's important. And the fact you also mentioned about her, she made a human perspective of history,
Mm-hmm.
basically. She was speaking to, you know, and that's very important, I feel. Also, I try to do that with my own podcast and my Instagram page and
Absolutely.
anything I post. It's easy to post the big picture stuff, the big images, the military campaigns, which are all important, of course, because they
Mm-hmm.
make history, they shape history. But the human perspective, I believe, sometimes is lost when we're studying
Mm-hmm.
history. People don't take a second to think, about the farmer who lived in Kansas, or the
Mm-hmm.
the peasant family in Russia. What were they going through during these times of great turmoil and everything? And so that's very important as well. That Dickey was an early pioneer of basically grasping the human perspective of the study of history. Ultimately,
Absolutely. And I just want to sort of touch on 2 points that you made. First is, yeah, she was a woman. And you do have in World War II this, incredible
hmm
pantheon of female
yep,
reporters, right? Because this was a
yeah,
time when men were fighting. And actually, Dickey would run into her former journalistic colleagues in the field because they were now fighting. And so there was room for women
yeah,
to come in and
hmm
report. But, with so
yeah,
many other fields, we know that once the men came home, the women were pushed out and pushed back into the home in the 1950s.
hmm
And Dickie wasn't going, damn it,
yeah,
excuse my language. But she wanted to stay out in the field, and she did. And she was one of the few who had the perseverance to do so. And then frankly, a lot of the women who reported in World War II actually tragically passed away soon thereafter.
hmm
So it was a real loss of sort of institutional knowledge of female reporters, but you do have Dickey. And then the second point I
yeah,
wanted to just touch on that you made was this idea of big picture reporting versus, you know, focusing on the individual. And certainly at the
hmm
time, really up until the later Vietnam War era, starting in 1968, that is the main sort of style of journalism is this big picture to take in what the press secretary has told you and then
mm
report that verbatim. And Dickey
yeah,
actually wrote extensively about the danger of this, particularly in the 1960s as the Kennedy administration started to try to clamp down on press access to the conflict in Vietnam. It wasn't the war yet.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, she was a pioneer. Ernie Pyle was another one that predated her, but he again died on Okinawa, and she really carried this banner into the Cold War. And then it became sort of the style of journalism that we are used to today, but it wasn't when she was practicing it.
Yeah, yeah. It was definitely a different time, but
Mhm.
an important time to highlight. And that's
Mhm.
why people, stories like this of Dickey and many others that are, whether they're known or still not known yet, these are important stories, that we need to know, which is, so this is great. Let's see, if we move on, I know that, there was you had, limited resources when it came to, researching for Dickey. But
Mm.
how did you overcome the limitations and just, get what you had and put it all together?
Well, thankfully, and this isn't available online, but thankfully, the Wisconsin State Historical Archives has preserved her records. And
That's
she
great.
herself, I think, had a sense of her the importance of her story. And I think she hoped that someone would
Yeah,
write her
it sounds like
biography.
she would. Hmm.
Yeah, because she kept letters, writings, journals dating back, to her childhood. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so I went to the archives, to her archives, and I read everything that was there. I read every single page in her archives. And
Wow.
and there's, I don't know, tens of thousands of pages there. Because she
Yeah.
has her drafts of all of her articles. She wrote an autobiography. She has the draft of the
Wow. Mhm.
autobiography, which is very different than what was published. She wrote a lot of articles that were never published, that are nevertheless just so eye-opening and shed new light on parts of history that we think are, you know, completely discovered, but are not. Um, and so that was how I got to know her and her legacy. But then, because
Yeah.
not a lot has been written about her, right? There was a biography published in, I think, 1989. And there's been a couple, articles written about her, but nothing to the extent of, say, like Eleanor Roosevelt or another historical figure that we know about. I supplemented
Yeah.
that with a lot of research about the events and historical moments that she found herself in, because I really wanted to give um, a more complete context,
Yeah.
because her legacy is so um, weighty. I just wanted readers to understand sort of, I wanted to put her, situate her where she truly was, So when she was with Special Forces in Laos, for instance,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about what is the secret war that the CIA is building in
Hmm.
Laos that then continues to Vietnam. And where is she in that? And what is she actually seeing that she doesn't even know that she's seeing? And if I can just beg your indulgence for a moment, she would see these pilots, these American pilots who were ex-Marine, delivering food and ammunition to the special forces and the Hmong guerrilla forces they were training. Well, it
Hmm.
turns out these were Air America pilots, right? This was the beginning of the secret war in Vietnam. And she was one of the first to write about them. And she didn't know who they were, or what the sort of history, what the total impact of this would be. But her documentation of it sheds new light on that history, nevertheless.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, she, without even knowing it, she was making history,
That's
with
right.
every, step along the way, it seems, which is amazing. It's just, it truly is amazing. And it's even more amazing that someone like yourself, and you said, obviously there was an article written about her, and minimal stuff, but I think it's great that someone took the time to really, get this all together, do this research, because I know it wasn't easy for you. This just the research alone, going through the page. Sometimes people don't understand what it takes to, write a book on anything really. I mean, if you're writing a fictional book, it's a little different. But when you're writing about someone who was a real person, going
Mm.
in real life events in the real world, that research, just to back it up, make sure you have every detail, spot on or as close as possible. It's
Yes,
uh,
it
it's
keeps me
really
up
like,
nights. It keeps me up nights. I have to
yeah,
like go
I can
back and make
imagine.
sure that I
I
got
can
it
imagine.
right.
Oh yeah, yeah. That pretty much would lead into my next question about special knowledge that was
Mm.
required to for this book. But I don't think just speaking with you that you needed any special knowledge per se. I think it was just the perseverance to sit down and go through all this, which you did, and you did very well. And
Thank
but would
you.
you like to add anything onto there about any? Did you have to like learn? Obviously, how much did you know about like these world events, and how much did you not know? Like, did you have to learn a lot, or did you know some stuff?
Both, right? I think I was actually very lucky to be perfectly positioned to write this book in a lot of ways because I did have a history in human rights. I did have a history in international studies. I
Yeah.
was familiar with, the sort of World War II to the Vietnam War. None of these topics were new to me. And so, because of that, I was able to ask the right questions. And I think that's the most difficult thing about writing any history
Yeah.
is asking the right questions because those will guide your research and determine um, ultimately the scope of what you're able to discover. So I'm not trying to toot my own horn, as it were. I'm just very grateful that I was hopefully able to accurately present the totality of Dickie Chapelle's legacy.
Yeah, definitely. And what's a wonderful thing about at least the field of history is that we're always learning things. So
Mm.
you never know. 20 years from now, there might be some secret letter that comes out that Dickie wrote that you never read before, and you might learn something new about her. Still, it's like always, it's continuous. Because there's so it's the field is so vast, and
Hmm.
uh, imagine if her all the letters she wrote and the correspondence and just everything that she put her hand to just got thrown out after her death or got lost. How easy it could have been lost any way you could think of. Then
Hmm.
what? But it's just history is a very interesting field in that sense. You're always learning something.
Absolutely. And history, right? History is written by the victors, right? This has always been the
Yeah.
case since Herodotus. And now we are seeing a new moment in history, not only
Mm-hmm.
as we witness these new civil rights movements, right? But
Mm-hmm.
also as people rewrite history, go back into the archives and
Yeah.
find new stories and also new interpretations of old stories. And so I get the chills thinking and talking about it. I think this is a wonderful moment to be a historian and to read history and as you do to revisit history on podcasts and make it so accessible to so many people.
Yeah, yeah. It truly is a wonderful time, especially imagine, for example, the research, how much of it we can actually do on the computer now, how much is available online now, thankfully. But
Mhm.
people don't understand that a lot is still not even available on online. But
Mhm.
the information that is available to us and the pictures and the videos and documents, it
Mhm.
really, compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It's a complete paradigm shift. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Now back to the book.
Mm.
When it comes to publishers, did they give you any problems and any grief over anything in the book? Did they want to change anything, or did they pretty much give you free range to present her story?
Oh, my editor, Hannah O'Grady at St. Martin's, is an angel. Like, I could not imagine having a better editor. I will say this. The first draft I gave her was twice as long as the
Wow.
printed book, and the printed book is 300. How many pages is it? Is it 300 or 400 pages long? I can't remember.
I think 4.
No, it's three hundred and
Really?
fifty pages long, right? So I gave her a
Wow.
700-page manuscript because I just wanted everything in it, you know? Like I
Yeah.
was so excited. And
Mm-hmm.
she was like, I think we can cut it back a little bit. And
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
right,
So, so in
because,
that sense,
oh, but I was just saying, you know, if you tell the whole story, right, you actually lose
hmm
the story because you
yeah,
have to find what is the pith of it, what's the most important part of it. And so
yeah.
she really helped me cut out those portions that I find fascinating. And if any of your listeners want my first draft, I will send it to them. So you can read all about the histories of the various ships she, sailed on, and the history of the tractor was also included in my original draft for various reasons. But no, that was the big change, was it was far too long for its own good.
Well, I mean, if that's the only problem you're having with an editor is that, you're giving us too much. Can you just cut a little bit instead of them pushing or wanting to take something out or put something, and then that's great. I'm glad to hear
Yeah,
that because,
yeah.
as you know, a lot of people do have those problems with publishers and
Hmm.
editors, and not just current times. It's throughout history there have been authors that have had to deal with that. Um, just they can't get the book that they want out because of they're being restricted and they can't get that story out. But I'm
Hmm.
glad that your only issue was that you had to cut back a little bit. So I'm
On
sure that
completely extemporaneous things, completely like tangential things, absolutely.
yeah, but that's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. I got all right. Now tell the viewers what do you expect from after they read this book? What do you hope that readers will take away from it?
Do you know, I have to be honest, I really hope people are inspired. And I
Mm-hmm.
hope people are inspired, and this is sort of like a tone shift, but Dickie really loved America. And she saw its faults, right? She always saw its faults. She was critical throughout her career, of America. She was critical of its feet dragging in passing the Marshall Plan, which was the foreign aid package to Europe after the war.
Yeah.
She was critical of its um, lack of response to communist incursion in Hungary, of their
Mm-hmm.
lack of response to helping the Algerian people who wanted liberation. She was critical of them arming the French as they continued to try to oppress the Algerian people. Again, she called out the America for arming the Batista regime in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
So she was critical. She wasn't, a rah rah, everything is great kind of person, but she also believed that America had the capacity to be better than it was. And that is a rare thing.
Yeah.
And we are in that same moment now, right? Where we are all working to make America better than it is,
Yeah.
because because we believe it can be. Um, and so I hope people are inspired by her passion and her perseverance and her journey in reporting on America's role in this Cold War, but also people around the world who are fighting for freedom. And she was more than anything on their side.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I hope as well that people are inspired by her story because this is a woman that I feel, you know, she should be a role model to many young women who think they can't do this or they can't do that or that the only thing they can do is this or that. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
a woman who grew up and lived through the 40s, 50s, 60s, when times were tougher for women, there was more, it was restrictive. Today,
Mm-hmm.
women have freedom that I don't think a lot of women today understand the freedom that they have, now compared to, 40s, 50s, 60s,
Or
but
even 30 years ago. Like I
or even
remember, in the like look, I'm not saying that it's not tough for people now too,
hmm
but when I was a young woman work as a waitress, it was just like accepted that your customers would grope you. That was
yeah,
just like what happened, you
yeah.
know? And I
hmm
maybe that's TMI, but like that's just an experience that women had, and it just gets worse from there, you know?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and I agree, but at the same time, even though women have more freedom now, I was phone banking during 2020 for Joe Biden.
hmm
And I spoke to a woman in Florida, a young woman, and I asked her if she was going to vote. And she was 18 years old. And she said, no, because my dad says that teenage girls shouldn't vote, that we don't know enough. I
wow.
mean, this is 2020. So there
Yeah,
are, and I think increasingly as we look at what is coming out of, the Supreme Court with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, we see that these struggles are ongoing and are not yet over. So I do hope women are
yeah.
inspired to
Mhm.
follow their own journey, follow their own voice, and be brave and be bold.
Yep, yep. That's great. Those words right there, ladies, that try to live by those words right there. Try to live maybe pick up the book, read about Dickey. Well, be inspired a little bit, definitely. And like you were
Absolutely.
saying about Dickey being critical, of the different situations throughout time that we've dealt with militarily. And that's the beauty of this country, that we can be critical of it, and that's great that she was, because that's what makes a good American. You have to say
Mhm.
something when something is wrong. You have to
Mhm.
take a stand for it if something is wrong. And Dickie was critical of all the different situations going on in the world at the time, and she let it be known. Even though she was a woman, even though she was this or that, she didn't care, which is great. And
Mhm.
like I said, it just goes back to that only in this country you could be critical of your government, which is a
Mhm.
good thing.
Mhm.
And I hope that more people, remember that, because sometimes I feel like that's lost on people. That little thing like that, something as simple as saying, criticizing your government. In other
Mhm.
countries, you can end up dead from that.
Yeah,
It's that
just look at
serious.
Russia. I mean, come
hmm
on. And this is very
Yeah.
real, and this is happening right now. So we
hmm
are very fortunate. We are very fortunate to be able to express our opposition
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and vote. Everybody vote.
Mhm. Yes, yes, exactly. Voting is very important. I know people feel that a lot of people feel it doesn't matter, but vote. Do it anyways. Even if you think it doesn't matter, just do it.
It
For whatever
matters.
side you want to vote for, just do
Yeah,
it.
it matters. I mean, you look at Wisconsin 2016 and 2010, right? That was like a margin of 10,000 both times, I think. And
hmm
you know, people have
Yeah,
10,000 Instagram followers, and that's not even a big influencer, and that's
exactly.
the
Yeah.
difference between democracy and not.
hmm
So your vote matters.
Exactly. You're 100% right. Yes. So just to close this out, almost closed it out. We're almost there. I just wanted to ask you, do you have any, I know that, the book's coming out, I believe it's July 7th, is it?
July 11th.
July 11th. Perfect.
Yes.
Everyone, I hope all the viewers watching this are inspired by Dickie Chappelle, at least from the little bit you heard here today, and you go out and you get first to the front, the untold story of Dickie Chappelle, Trailblazing Female War Correspondent by Lorissa Rinehart. And I just wanted to ask you, what can we expect from you? You have any future projects you're thinking of? You think maybe you might write more books like this book, maybe hidden female figures from history, or do you have anything else in your mind?
Well, the ink's not dry yet, so I can't discuss it,
hmm
absolutely. But yes, I am working on another book. Yes, it's about another trailblazing woman who is not celebrated enough, whose life was equally exciting as Dickie's. So I am so happy to be writing it, and I'll be really happy if you invite me back on your show to talk about it when it comes out. But yes, I have another book in the works.
Great. That's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. Really, I look forward to seeing what that book's going to be about. Because, like I said, this book, this is just something I enjoy seeing.
Me too.
As you probably figured out, I just like to highlight these things, highlight hidden history because it's important. It truly
Mhm.
is. And Dickie's story is important, and there's many other stories out there that are just as important. And men,
Absolutely.
women,
Mhm.
everybody. It's history is deep, and it goes deep. And it's a field that I hope more children and more teenagers become interested in as the years go on, because right now those numbers are down. Uh, I just wanted to circle back to my beginning question before we
Of
close this out. And I want to thank you again, Larissa, for this
course.
conversation. This has been great.
Oh,
Learning more about Dickie has been great. Just speaking with you has been great. So thank you.
thank you.
All right. Now let's ask it again. Why isn't Dickie a bigger part of women's history? What do you think, Larissa?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is okay, so I'll back up just a little bit. A lot of times, women, while they're alive, uh, are kind of well known, right? Like Dickie was actually quite well known in her era. But when she passed away, she was sort of
Yeah.
lost to history. And why is this? It's because she was her own best advocate. She was constantly promoting herself, writing articles, going on TV, getting interviewed, doing what she could to promote herself. When she passed away, she was her own best advocate, and she didn't have another
Yeah.
advocate for a very long time.
Mm.
And there is a period, I think, in after someone's passing where they can be sort of written into history or
Hmm.
left out of it.
Yeah.
And she, up until this point, was left out of it because she did not have someone to continually promote her.
Hmm.
And, you know, that is because most of history was written by people who are identify as men, and they tended to write mostly about men. And
Hmm.
so she was not a man. I mean, it seems overly simplified, and yet there is, the data
Yeah.
is there to
Yeah.
to sort of prove this very simple point.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to just add that, yeah, like you said, yeah, yeah, history was written, yeah, a lot of it's written by men, of course, especially, back then,
Mhm.
yeah,
And also, heterosexual white men is another
yeah,
important
mhm,
part to put in
yeah,
that. You know what I mean? So it's not like
exactly.
just women were left out of history. It was
Hmm.
LGBTQ people, people of color,
Hmm.
anyone who is a minority at all,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing I just wanted to add was that these men, as you pointed out,
Mhm.
heterosexual white men,
Mhm.
they they didn't favor a strong, opinionated woman like Dickie
Mhm.
was. So that
Mhm.
was one of the things automatically against her, which shouldn't be
Absolutely.
something that, is held against you, but
Mhm.
sadly it was. But I'm
Mhm.
glad now that Dickie does have someone to promote her. You're her
Thank you.
advocate now. Even,
Thank you.
no, I hope you reach, a great, a vast audience, and these people learn her story. And even if you just reach those people and that's it, that's more people in this world that know this story. They could hopefully spread it, and more people could know about Dickie Chappelle. So that, that's great.
Thank you so much, John. It was so lovely chatting with you. What a joy. What a pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you again for coming on. Thank you for contacting me. Uh, it was great having you on this. This is my first episode of this, I guess, interview series I'll be doing.
Great.
You are the first episode, so thank you. And
Awesome.
I would love to have you on again in the future. We could talk about, other things, of course. If it's not a book you're working on, we could talk about anything. It's a
Anytime, John. I'd love to chat with you
that
anytime.
that would be
This
great.
was so much
So
fun.
thank you for everyone who's watching. I hope you all go out there and, yeah, if anything, at least Google Dickie Chappelle. At least do that. And if something comes up and you think it's interesting, or if you've heard enough here from Larissa, go out there and get First to the Front: The Untold Story of Dickie Chappelle, Trailblazing Female War Correspondent by Lorissa Rinehart. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Larissa, and I hope you all have a great day.